Today we continue on with our NHL offseason plan series. Today we're looking at the number 4 ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the Toronto Maple Leafs. After another first round exit in the 2022 Stanley Cup Playoffs, what changes will we see? Will they be significant? We'll discuss the offseason for the Leafs coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we're now on to the Toronto Maple Leafs, the 4th best team from the NHL's regular season in our off-season plan series. So today, in case you're new to this series, we're going to quickly recap the 21-22 season, take a look at some results and how things went. Secondly, we're going to explore their salary cap situation to see where things stand in that regard. And then we're going to say, okay, with that salary cap space, who do they have on expiring contracts that either need to be re-signed or possibly replaced? So we'll look at the expiring deals, and then we're going to tackle the top burning questions facing the franchise or the top priorities facing the Leafs this offseason. So let's get started by doing the 21-22 review. Now, let's take a look at their regular season stats. They had a really solid season, record-setting in franchise history with a record of 54-21-7 for 115 points. They scored 312 goals, which is quite a really amazing feat. For second best in the league, only the Florida Panthers outscored them, and they actually outscored them by a wide margin at that. Goals against were okay, but they really, based on how this team played, could have been better. 252 against for 19th best. Their power play was the best in the league, 27.3%. That's an amazing result for an entire 82-game campaign. And the PK was pretty solid too, at 82.1%, with the 8th best result from the NHL's regular season. And like I said, unfortunately, with all this regular season success, still came a first-round loss in the 2022 Stanley Cup Playoffs against the two-time defending Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning in 7 games. They had a 3-2 series lead. Unfortunately, lost Game 6 in Tampa, Game 7 at home in Toronto. Early on, it looked like they were gonna pull this out and get a win, but unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. Of course, the regular season also seen them have some real big accomplishments individually, like Austin Matthews, top 60 goals for the first time in his career. It's the first time the NHL has seen that in some time since Steven Stamkos achieved it. Mitch Marner came really close to a 100-point season, putting up 97 points. We saw them make some nice acquisitions at the deadline, which appeared to be good fits. And really, I don't think we can say they weren't. They worked out well, like Mark Giordano, for example, and Colin Blackwell. Of course, Giordano's already re-signed with the Leafs at league minimum, taking the Jason Spezza special, you could call it. And of course, Jason Spezza, mentioning his name, he's already announced his retirement. So this regular season has seen a lot, and we've already had some news out of the Leafs in the early part of the offseason. So now let's explore their salary cap situation as they head into the full swing of this summer's offseason. Now, right now, going into next year, they have 17 NHL contracts on the books for a total of $74.6 million. That's a lot of money. Of course, we know they have a lot of money tied up in their big four, and that's going to continue to be an issue affecting the cap moving forward. That leaves them $7.8 million available in salary cap space. Now, of course, a lot of people like to give the Leafs a hard time for the amount of money they have tied up in those 4 forwards. Of course, in case you're not familiar, is Matthews, Marner, Nylander, and Tavares. But you know what? Like, when they were projecting out what to pay these guys, maybe they could have done a better job with these contracts. I'm not going to completely let them off the hook. But at the same time, they also could have never predicted that we'd run into a pandemic that would last over 2 years, and we'd see a flat cap for even much longer than that. They would have been projecting out years out, saying they expect a certain number of increases, as you know, because they would have business projections for themselves in the league. And you know what? There's no way they could have predicted that the cap wouldn't be much higher by now, which would allow them to have more money to spend on other players, because they can certainly afford it. It's the cap that slows them down. Some people make an argument they should have like a luxury tax like we see in other leagues, but at this point, the way the cap works, it does make it awfully tight to pay players what their market value would dictate. You need to have some guys take a bit of a discount to leave money on the table to round out the roster to typically have more success. But we'll see how things go here. Now, looking at their expiring contracts. This is where things get very, very interesting. And even though this team finished so high in the regular season, 4th best in the league, one of the league's top teams, 7-game loss in the first round, you wouldn't think we'd see extensive changes. But the problem here is the cap and their expiring contracts are going to dictate that there probably will be more change than you would otherwise expect if things were a little bit different that way and they didn't have so many key players expiring and the cap wasn't so tight. We'd probably see them run it back with most of the same team. So, but they're going to have no choice but to change things up because of what they have to work with here. Now, on the RFA side of things, we have a list of 4 players, including Pierre Engvall, Andre Kasha, Rasmus Sandin, and Timothy Liljegren. Now, of course, all 4 of those players had decent years. They're certainly going to get contracts. There is some that question the future of Kasha with the future of the team, not because they don't like him or anything like that, but given the fact that he might be a cap casualty, and we'll discuss that further in the next segment. On the UFA side of things, they certainly have some interesting names, and if these guys aren't back, they're going to be tricky to replace, and the top of that list is goaltender Jack Campbell. Of course, he's played well for them since coming over from the Los Angeles Kings. Eventually last year ended up taking over the top spot in goaltending from Freddie Anderson. Of course, Freddie Anderson departed by free agency last offseason, leaving Campbell to be the main guy on his own this year with the help from Peter Mrazek, which didn't really work out. But Campbell's expiring deal, he's about to get himself the best payday of his career, and it's going to be very tricky to keep him in the fold. We also have Ilya Mikheyev, who's, obviously we know requested a trade about a year ago. Didn't get it. The Leafs denied it. They were hoping to give him more ice time, bigger role, and keep him in the mix, which they did. And he played well. He had a good season, and because of that, I think he's probably pricing himself out of Toronto as well. Colin Blackwell, who was a deadline pickup that came with Giordano from the Seattle Kraken. It's debatable. I'm not sure how the Leafs feel about Blackwell. Like, he wasn't in the lineup every single game, but he could be an option for them if they want to try to bring him back as a fairly cheap 4th liner. And of course, Ilya Lyubushkin's also a UFA who they acquired from Arizona earlier in the season, who was a decent right shot defenseman. He can give you that physicality, and he's not a guy that cost you a ton of money. I think it's debatable if he returns. It's not a given, but I don't think it's a given either that he leaves. I think they'd probably like to try to keep him, but it's going to be some other moves that'll probably have to happen to allow that to take place. So let's see. Now, in the next segment, which is the most interesting part of these videos, is what is the top burning questions facing the Toronto Maple Leafs this offseason? What are their top priorities? Well, for me, the number one thing that they need to figure out is goaltending. Clearly, they could score with the best of them in the NHL. Defense wasn't too bad last year, but it could be a little bit better. And that's overall team defense, not just on the blue line. But goaltending is a big question mark. Now, if Campbell was under contract moving forward, it really wouldn't be. I think Jack Campbell, I don't know if it's fair to call him an elite goaltender, but he's a good goaltender, and he's certainly not a slouch back there. He's not the reason why they lost. That's certainly not we can't point the finger and say goaltending was why the Leafs lost against the Lightning. It was not. But at the same time, because his contract has expired and he's going to be able to command a big raise, that poses big question marks. Peter Mrazek, who's under contract for 2 more years, that was an absolute bust of a situation. That did not work out in the Leafs. In the Leafs, he was injured a lot, and when he did play, things went horribly bad. So the Leafs are probably going to try everything they can, and it's going to be challenging to get out of the contract for those last 2 years. Whether they trade him, which is going to be difficult, they probably have to give up an extra asset given his play. If they buy him out, that's a possibility, but then they're going to have some dead cap space for a few years, which they're don't really have a lot of that to be wasting. But at the same time, they can't leave that full cap hit on there for the next 2 years either. I don't think it's fair to think that he's going to bounce back, but at the same time, they might be forced to hope he does, because Peter Mrazek, up until this year, has been a pretty good goaltender. This was one of the worst years of his career, and if you look at his past history, during his tenure with Detroit and Carolina, especially, history would suggest that he's a better goaltender than what we've seen in the 21-22 season. But I don't think the Leafs really want to take the risk that he won't be moving forward, because that was just an atrocious situation last year. So we'll see what they do, but lots of question marks. Now, there's a lot of talk. If Campbell can't be re-signed, And as of right now, we hear the latest reports from NHL insider Elliot Friedman is saying that there's not much at all for negotiations. Things are quiet. The last time that they had negotiations that they're aware of is the contract offer was really not anywhere near what Campbell and his camp were looking for, and that they're not really relevant conversations anymore because it's been a while. So it goes to show you that I don't think there's much confidence on either side that they're going to be able to get a deal done. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to make another attempt at this. I think Jack Campbell loves being a Leaf, and I think they really like him not only as a goalie but as a person. And I think they will make an attempt here, but it has to be for the right price. At the end of the day, they have to do things business-wise, not personally, right? So there's some that think that they could go into free agency or look at the trade market to replace him. Because if they lose Campbell, they don't even want Mrazek probably on a roster, period, let alone being their starter. That can't happen. So Mrazek ideally is not even the backup next year, so you might need more than one goaltender. I mean, obviously you have Erik Källgren, who came in after the Mrazek injury during his timeout, and he did okay. I mean, do they want him as a full-time backup next year? I don't know. I mean, if it's not a terrible situation, if they had to go into training camp with either Jack Campbell or another starting goaltender that they acquire, trade or free agency, as the starter with Källgren as the backup, I think they will deal with that at least to start the season, and they could address it as time goes on. Sometimes you see other goalies go through waivers, or maybe you could pick up somebody else that's not going to be too expensive. That might be a bit of an upgrade. But you're going to need a goalie back there who can give you at least 20 to 25 solid starts, and you can't be worried you're going to lose every single game when your backup goalie is in place. So certainly, you know, it's a tough situation, but could a John Gibson trade be in the mix? John Gibson's I think, in my opinion, he's a really good goaltender. You can't just look at stats, because you got to remember the last number of years the Anaheim Ducks haven't been a good team. So obviously the goalie stats for all goalies, to a degree at least, are a reflection of the team in front of them. But he's a really good goaltender, well experienced in the NHL and internationally. So to me, he would be a good potential replacement if they have to go down that road. If they go into free agency, there's not a lot of big names there, but one name that could be interesting might be Darcy Kemper, who's currently with the Avalanche. Of course, the Avalanche are in the Western Conference Finals. Kemper recently got hurt. He does have a bit of a history with injuries as well, so a little bit skeptical on that front, but there's not a lot of other names. You get Marc-Andre Fleury's out there. I honestly don't see that happening. I'd be surprised if he ended up in Toronto, but if I'm Kyle Dubas, I'm definitely looking into it for sure. But a big question mark. They got to figure out who their goalies are next year. And if they can't sign Campbell, they need another guy who can be at least as good, if not better than Campbell, to replace him to really have a good shot at this team winning a Stanley Cup. It's just that simple. It's a huge, huge question mark over this team. Now, we've heard of Elliot Friedman talking about the big Kawhi move. Now, in case that's a basketball analogy for the Toronto Raptors, of course, under the same ownership as the Leafs, Kawhi Leonard was acquired by the Raptors when they traded out DeMar DeRozan, who was a longtime Raptor, one of their best players ever at that point, and was a huge fan favorite. It wasn't a popular move right away, but when you trade a big popular player for another player who could be the same thing but a different style, it changed the whole direction and really propelled them to winning a championship. He's only there a short time, but they get the job done. Now, it's really lack of a better analogy, in my opinion. We're not going to see the same scenario because obviously Kawhi Leonard was arguably a top 5 player in the NBA at the time and didn't want to play for where he was. He wanted out and wanted to trade. I don't see a player on the NHL market right now that absolutely is in that spot. Now, the only one that kind of comes to mind who's, I wouldn't say he wants out, but it's widely recognized that he's likely being traded this offseason is JT Miller in Vancouver. Could that be a possibility? I mentioned it before. You never know. I wouldn't be shocked if they explore getting that type of player. If it's not him, another guy with a, tough to play against, lots of grit, big motor that just really propels and drags the team with them. That's the kind of player I think they need. Many people do agree that they don't necessarily have to do a significant major trade like that. It could be just a case of dealing with all these expiring deals and kind of tinkering around the supporting cast. Leave your core in place for the most part and do it that way. But if they do go to the route of doing a blockbuster deal, most people agree it's most likely, highly likely, that William Nylander is the guy that goes. So, could we see a Nylander trade for another top 6 to change the dynamic there? William Nylander's the kind of guy who's very talented, but he can drive you crazy at the same time. Look at the the scenario in the Lightning series where, he wouldn't go into the corners. He let up big time to go into the corner of the battle for the puck. But there's other times where he's brilliant offensively. Like, you can love him and hate him all in the same game sometimes. But, for the most part, if you just look at him on paper, he's productive and he's a good player. But there's an argument to be made that if you had a different kind of player, like a Miller or Tyler Bertuzzi or just another guy like that style, maybe it would give them a different mix and better for them to be tougher to play against while producing the same amount of offense, which I think there's an argument there, but it's not easy to find, easy to do. But if they go down that route and make that kind of trade, in my opinion, Nylander's the guy. Now, the next big question, number 3, here's on defense. I think for the most part, they already re-signed Mark Giordano, so that creates a bit of a logjam on the left side. The right side has question marks, obviously, because you have 5 left-handed defensemen, but you have 1 in TJ Brody, who always normally plays his weak side on the right. So you can have Brody play with Riley like you normally would, but then besides that, you've now got Muzzin, you've got Giordano, and you still have Rasmus Sandin, who's trying to get more of a role in this lineup. And there's already been reports from Friedman that says that Sandin's camp has concerns over where he fits next year and beyond. Obviously, this year he was injured for a while, but that played a role. But with Giordano re-signing and staying, unless they move like Muzzin, where's Sandin going to play? So there is an issue there. Now, Justin Hall's another guy who I don't expect to be back. If you get Brody on the right side, if you take out Hall, let's say you move him to another team. I don't know. There's lots of teams out there. He's 1 year and $2 million. I don't think they'll have a hard time trading him. They may not get a big return. Might be a mid-round pick. But whatever, that's fine. At least it gives them the option by trading out Hall's contract to turn around and give that money to Lyubushkin if they want to bring him back. Now, I'm not completely sold that he comes back, but I think that there's a chance. I think they liked him enough and seen the physicality that he can bring that they'd be open to it. So if you go with that, move Hall, re-sign Lyubushkin for similar money, then you have your right side as being Brody, Lyubushkin, and Liljegren. That's not too bad of a right side. It might not be the best it could be, but it's pretty good. Then, like I said, your left side, you've got Morgan Riley, Jake Muzzin, Mark Giordano, and Rasmus Sandin. Now, could they trade Jake Muzzin? That's been a hot topic around a lot of Leaf reporters and Leaf writers in the media as well. Problem is, he does have a lot of trade protection in his contract, so it's not like they can just up and move him wherever they want without his consent. So that's not easy. There's been some talk about maybe sending him back to LA, where he was traded from with Campbell in that trade a few years ago. He might agree to that. I don't know. Obviously, Jake Muzzin's a guy, according to Elliot Friedman, that they absolutely love this guy on and off the ice. Really beloved by teammates. Management loves his play and how hard he tries and the heart and their soul and the leadership. It's hard to put a price tag on those intangibles, but it's getting to the point now that that contract's almost problematic. Getting Sandin in there instead of Muzzin creates a big difference in cap. Obviously, Sandin's going to need a new deal. It's expected to be probably $2 million max, whereas he's making over $5 million, so that's over $3 million in salary cap savings. But it's a different kind of player, so I don't know if they go into camp with the 7D. It's not an absolute end-all be-all problem, but it does create a cap issue. Like, so we already reviewed their cap. You have $7.8 million available. If you end up spending 4 or 5 on a goaltender, that leaves you with $2.8 million. You haven't re-signed Mikheyev, Blackwell, Lyubushkin. But like I said, with Lyubushkin, you move out Hall, you give him his money. That kind of offsets. We expect Mikheyev and Blackwell to likely not return, or at least if Blackwell returns, it'd probably be like 1 year at $700,000-800,000. Like I said, on the RFA side of it, you got to give Pierre Engvall a contract. I mean, he's probably going to be looking at around, I don't know, somewhere in that 2.5 or 2.75 range. Kasha, that's why you also have to think that maybe outside of Sandin and Liljegren could, as much as we expect guys like Engvall or Kasha to maybe be around next year, it's going to get expensive for them to be able to handle all this without moving out a contract, and it's tough to do. So I know Friedman's talked about some RFAs maybe not getting qualifying offers because as much as they like the player, they just can't go down the road of what they're going to end up costing them, especially the ones that have arbitration eligibility. If they ends up, if they tell the player we can't offer you more than 2.5, let's say, but the player says, well, I can easily should be worth 3.5 to 4, and it goes to arbitration, the arbitrator is probably going to side with the player. It's not that the Leafs think the player's not worth that, they just can't afford to pay it. There's a difference. So to get out of all that, they could just not qualify them, period. They could attempt to still negotiate with the player at that point because they become a UFA. And if they can't agree to less money, then they're going to have to go try to find a bargain replacement. They have to go bargain hunting. So it is completely reasonable to think that it's a possibility that a guy like Kasha might not get a qualifying offer and could end up leaving just because they can't afford him. I mean, he does have a history with injuries. He was healthier this year than he had been recently, but he still had some issues. So you have to be, concerned over his long-term future too. But it's going to be really interesting. Like I said, they have some big question marks. They have to make at least one, maybe two changes on defense. They need to figure out their goaltending. They have to decide if they want to bring back those 4 guys as is, or do they want to, after 5 consecutive years, make a change. Change up the dynamic a little bit. I don't know. It's going to be tough. They have some big question marks facing them, but we're definitely going to be seeing a fair bit of turnover. Like I said, at this point, most people are expecting Campbell to not return. I wouldn't rule that out just yet, but it doesn't look promising, at least the way things stand now. But anything can change with one phone call, and we'll see where it goes. But this is Campbell's last chance to really cash in probably for his career. He's an older, late-blooming goaltender. If he doesn't get paid now, he's put himself at risk to not get paid. Like I said, Mikheyev is probably not back. You could see a case of guys like Hall or Kerfoot or other guys that are not in your immediate core, even Muzzin, maybe be moved too. So we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on all the Leafs activity that we're bound to see. They have some big, tough questions, mostly salary cap driven and to a little bit of roster construction driven to get over that hump. But to be honest, I think that the Leafs this year could have survived and won that Game 7. I think they could have possibly went all the way to at least the conference final, maybe even the Stanley Cup final. It's hard to say, but by far they had a really tough opponent and it just did not work out. But I think the way Tampa handled Florida, I think the Leafs probably could have done the same, and they'd be in tough right now. It'd be hard to say how they'd react and play against this Rangers team because they're, doing extremely well right now too. But, at the same time, even to get that far would be a huge step for this team. And, they could have went a long ways, I think, if they could have got over that hump. So even though, like I said, you don't want to overreact because of the circumstances, but the salary cap, unfortunately, is going to dictate a decent amount of change. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. We'll discuss further. Of course, if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news and rumors on all 32 NHL teams. And of course, we still have more videos to come completing this series. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.